Now, to discuss the latest on tariffs and inflation, we're joined now by David Tawil, president of ProChain Capital. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, let's start with CPI. Walk us through the factors that contributed to that sharp rise in consumer prices in January.
Well, I think there's a fair amount of seasonality that constantly goes into the January report. In addition, as your correspondent pointed out, the stickiest and hardest part of it is really housing. And housing is something that is not going to be solved easily. You know, here in the United States, the average age of a home buyer is now 38 years old when it was 28 years old in 1991. And as a matter of fact, on the other side of that coin, renters, the average renter is 42 years old, whereas just 3 years ago, it was 33 years old. So a lot of younger people staying at home with their parents, as well as older people leaving their homes, choosing to become renters or maybe being forced to become renters. And so clearly we have a problem in the United States with housing availability and affordability, and interest rates obviously play a very important part in that. But as well, we are also facing potential tariffs on a bunch of raw materials that come into this country for purposes of housing. So when it comes to inflation, I think housing is really the hardest point to go ahead and get off of. I think most of the other things that go into the CPI are frankly not things to get concerned about. It's going to take a long time to get to Powell's 2% target, but that's to be expected. The last end of any race like this is certainly the hardest.
David, there hasn't been a day where we haven't heard the word tariff. As you mentioned, it seems like every country, friend or adversary could be impacted, is being impacted. And we also heard about Trump's, promises made, promises kept. So how could these new tariffs, as they come in, impact inflation in the coming months? I mean, what should we all expect?
I think we're hearing arguments on both sides in terms of what the effects would be. And, logic dictates that certainly higher prices means that those prices are going to be higher in the marketplace, right? Tariffs are going to go ahead and add to the price. And so therefore, logic would dictate tariffs go ahead and increase inflation. However, there are a bunch of things that could potentially go ahead and push against that, that we may not see through. First of all, every threat of a tariff doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get a tariff. As we've now seen in the case of Mexico and in the case of Canada, it's a bargaining chip. It's an opening salvo to maybe a larger discussion with lots of counterparties on various matters, not even just trade. And so therefore, I think we need to wait and see as far as investors and as far as consumers. However, you make a very valid point in terms of what does industry do about this? And Ford's CEO over the weekend, for instance, was almost apoplectic because they have to go ahead and account for so many things. Parts being made in Mexico, they've got steel and aluminum that goes into automobiles. They really don't know where to turn in terms of which fire to go ahead and fight first. And so therefore, certain industries are really under the gun here and really don't know where to turn. I think it's going to take a while until the dust settles and we get a good sense of what the reality is from all of these tariff threats.
Yeah, some important points you made there. David, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you quickly about the inflation report and how that might impact the likelihood of Federal Reserve rate cuts. We heard from Jerome Powell. What do you see here in the next couple of weeks?
I think Powell is incredibly independent. I think he said all of the right things. There's no way that he could go ahead and cut rates, and I think the market is getting the sign of that now that, is one rate cut maybe towards the end of the year is what people are going ahead and projecting. I think the talk about rate hikes is a little bit too premature at this point. The things that I was particularly interested in regarding Powell up on the Hill were his comments regarding cryptocurrency, frankly. He said that we will not be getting central bank digital currency here in the United States. He said that he has no problem with banks and financial institutions holding Bitcoin. and he believes that there was a fair amount of debanking that went on in this country regarding cryptocurrency activities under the previous presidential administration. So for me, those were the highlights. The rest of it was as expected.